At his second wedding reception, the millionaire froze when he saw his pregnant ex-wife wiping tables with trembling hands. She was hiding a truth that could destroy everything. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Sarah Matthews stood by the kitchen window of their elegant apartment, watching the late afternoon sun cast golden reflections across Lake Michigan. The view had taken her breath away when Jonathan first brought her here 3 years ago. Now, 18 months into their marriage, she still sometimes felt like an imposter in this sleek Chicago high-rise, a feeling she hoped would dissolve tonight. She smoothed her hands over the crisp white tablecloth she'd carefully laid out on their Italian marble dining table. The candles were strategically placed, waiting to be lit. The bottle of Jonathan's favorite Bordeaux was breathing, and nestled between two crystal wine glasses sat a tiny pair of baby booties, pale yellow with white trim. Sarah touched her still flat stomach, a nervous smile playing on her lips. A baby. Their baby. The thought sent equal waves of terror and joy through her body. Jonathan had always been vague about children, deflecting the conversation with talk about timing and career phases. But they were stable now. His family's real estate business was thriving, and she'd recently been promoted to general manager at Bellini's, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. "This changes everything," she whispered to herself, rehearsing the words she would say when he walked through the door. The sound of keys in the lock made her jump. She quickly lit the candles, smoothed her hair, and straightened the simple black dress she'd splurged on for the occasion. "Sarah?" Jonathan's voice echoed through the apartment. "Are you home?" "In the dining room," she called back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jonathan Reeves appeared in the doorway, his tall frame impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she'd made in a month before meeting him. At 32, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie as his eyes scanned the elaborate table setting. "Are we celebrating something? Did I forget an anniversary?" Sarah moved toward him, taking his briefcase and setting it aside. "No anniversary. Just wanted to do something special tonight." She reached up to kiss him, inhaling the expensive cologne that always clung to his skin. He returned the kiss distractedly. "I had the day from hell. The New York expansion is turning into a nightmare. Dad thinks we're moving too fast, but the opportunity won't wait." He poured himself a scotch from the bar cart, bypassing the wine she'd selected. "I hope dinner isn't too elaborate. I barely have an appetite." "It's just that chicken you like with the lemon and herbs," Sarah said, trying to mask her disappointment at his preoccupation. "But first, I thought we could toast to some news." Jonathan checked his phone, scrolling through messages. "Can it wait until after I shower? Patterson sent the revised projections and they're not what we hoped." "Actually," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, "this is pretty important." Something in her tone made him look up. His eyes narrowed slightly, then drifted to the table, finally noticing the baby booties. For a long moment, he simply stared. "Jonathan," she said, unable to contain her smile despite his silence, "we're having a baby. I found out yesterday and I wanted to surprise you." The silence stretched between them, turning from expectant to uncomfortable. Jonathan set his glass down with deliberate care. "A baby," he finally said, his voice flat. "Now." Sarah's smile faltered. "Yes, I'm about 8 weeks along. The doctor said everything looks perfect." Jonathan ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it in a way she rarely saw. "A baby? Now? This is going to ruin everything." His voice rose with each word. "We're about to expand into the New York market. I'm working 16-hour days. I don't have time for a baby crying around the house." Sarah took a step back, stunned by his reaction. "But I thought we wanted to start a family eventually." "Eventually, Sarah, eventually." Jonathan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Not when we're on the verge of the biggest deal of my career. I can handle most of the childcare, she offered quickly. My schedule at the restaurant is flexible. I can cut back my hours. Cut back? Jonathan interrupted, his voice scathing. And how exactly will that look to my parents? My mother already thinks I married beneath me. Now you want to be what? A part-time hostess and full-time mom? The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Your mother thinks you married beneath you? Jonathan's expression shifted from anger to something worse, pity mixed with contempt. A family? Sarah, you can barely organize a dinner for my associates without embarrassing us both. Have you ever noticed how my mother looks at you? How my friends politely smile when you try to join conversations about politics or economics? Sarah wrapped her arms around her midsection as if to shield the tiny life there from his words. I try my best. I'm learning. Learning? He shook his head. It's been 3 years. Some things can't be learned, Sarah. Some things you either have or you don't. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't understand. I thought we were happy. I thought you loved me. I do love you, he said, but the words sounded hollow. But love doesn't change reality. Let's be honest here. You'll always be that waitress from Indiana trying to pass herself off as someone important. A baby will only make you more useless than you already are. Sarah gasped, the cruelty of his words stealing her breath. Jonathan, please. You will never be the kind of woman a man like me needs by his side, he continued relentlessly. I thought I could shape you into something close enough, but I was wrong. Sarah's legs gave way, and she sank into a dining chair. The candles flickered between them, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the romantic scene she'd so carefully created. What are you saying? She whispered. That you don't want our baby? Jonathan drained his scotch and poured another. I'm saying this is the worst possible timing. I'm saying you've made a unilateral decision that affects both our lives without consulting me. I'm saying... He stopped, staring at the baby booties with naked disdain. I need to think. He turned and walked to his home office, closing the door with a decisive click that seemed to echo through the apartment. Sarah remained at the table, the untouched food growing cold, the candles burning lower, casting their warm glow on a scene that had turned ice cold. Hours later, after crying herself into exhaustion in their bedroom, Sarah heard Jonathan making phone calls in his office. His voice rose and fell, discussing business matters as if nothing life-altering had happened, as if their world hadn't just shattered. When she finally emerged, red-eyed and hollow, she found the dining room cleared. The food was gone, the candles extinguished. In the kitchen trash can, partially hidden beneath vegetable peelings, were the yellow baby booties. Sarah retrieved them with trembling hands, brushing away a smear of sauce. She carried them back to the bedroom, where she curled on her side of the bed, cradling them against her chest. Don't worry, little one, she whispered to her still flat stomach. You are enough for me. You will always be enough. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan became increasingly distant and cruel. Where once he had corrected her social missteps with gentle guidance, he now pointed them out with biting commentary. Where he had once proudly introduced her at functions, he now left her to fend for herself among people who clearly viewed her as an amusing curiosity, the common girl who had somehow snagged Jonathan Reeves. You're showing, he commented one morning, 3 months after her announcement, eyeing her changing body with distaste. None of your cocktail dresses will fit for the Henderson Gala. I can get a maternity dress, Sarah suggested quietly. Jonathan laughed. Perfect. You can waddle around the ballroom spilling drinks on my potential investors. That evening, he placed a manila envelope on the marble coffee table as Sarah sat reading a pregnancy book. What's this? She asked, reaching for it. Divorce papers, he said casually, as if discussing the weather. I've signed my part. You should read them carefully. Remember the prenuptial agreement you signed? You walk away with what you brought in, nothing. Sarah stared at him, unable to comprehend the coldness in his eyes. "You're divorcing me because I'm pregnant?" "I'm divorcing you because this marriage was a mistake," he replied. "I thought a small-town girl would be grateful, loyal. Instead, you've trapped me with a pregnancy I never wanted." "Trapped you?" Sarah's voice rose with indignation. "It takes two people to make a baby, Jonathan. And it takes one signature to end a marriage," he countered smoothly. "I'm moving to New York tomorrow. The attorney says you have 30 days to vacate the apartment." 30 days? Where am I supposed to go? Panic rose in her throat. "I'm pregnant, Jonathan." "That's not my problem anymore." He straightened his cuffs, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache despite everything. "It was a mistake to think a girl from Indiana could adapt to my world. You should go back where you belong." That night, while Sarah sobbed into her pillow, Jonathan methodically packed his belongings. She heard him making calls, canceling their joint credit cards, instructing his assistant about the move. When she finally fell into fitful sleep, she dreamed of falling, endlessly falling, with no one to catch her. In the morning, he was gone. So was every dollar from their joint accounts. Within a week, she discovered he had forged her signature on several financial documents, leaving her not only without resources but with significant debt. 4 months pregnant, Sarah Matthews was evicted onto the freezing Chicago sidewalk in January with only 2 suitcases of clothes and $200 hidden in a shoebox. A woman abandoned by the man who had once promised to love her forever, carrying a child he had rejected as an inconvenience. As tears froze on her cheeks in the bitter wind, Sarah could never have imagined that these cruel words would one day become the fuel that would propel her to build an empire that would make Jonathan Reeves look insignificant in comparison. The cold January wind whipped mercilessly against Sarah's face as she stood on the sidewalk outside what had been her home for the past 3 years. Her suitcases sat beside her like silent witnesses to her humiliation, condensation from her breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the gray Chicago morning. Just 3 months ago, she had been Mrs. Jonathan Reeves, expectant mother and wife to one of Chicago's rising real estate developers. Now she was just Sarah Matthews again, 4 months pregnant, homeless, and watching the doorman who once greeted her with a smile avoid making eye contact. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you can't loiter here," he finally said, his discomfort evident. "Building policy." Sarah nodded numbly, her gloved hands instinctively moving to her slightly rounded belly. "Of course, I understand. I'm just waiting for my Uber." The lie came easily, preserving what little dignity she had left. There was no Uber coming. The $200 hidden in a shoebox in her larger suitcase needed to last until she figured out what to do next. The previous night had been a blur of horror. After weeks of increasingly cruel treatment following her pregnancy announcement, Jonathan had finally shown his true colors. She'd been in the bathroom when she heard him in their bedroom, the sound of drawers opening and closing with furious efficiency. "What are you doing?" she'd asked, emerging to find him packing the last of his designer suits. "I told you I'm moving to New York tomorrow," he'd replied without looking at her. "The expansion won't manage itself." "But what about me? What about us working through this?" Her hand had drifted to her stomach, a gesture that seemed to irritate him more each time she did it. Jonathan had finally turned to her, his handsome face set in lines of cold determination. "There is no us to work through, Sarah. I've emptied our joint accounts. Well, my accounts that I generously gave you access to. You'll find the credit cards no longer work." His voice had been clinical, detached, as if he were discussing a business transaction gone sour. "The divorce papers are on the table. I suggest you sign them quickly. My lawyer says it will be better for you." "Better for me?" The shock had made her voice rise. "How is any of this better for me?" His laugh had been the cruelest part, short, dismissive, laced with contempt. "Because if you fight me on this, I'll make sure everyone knows how you trapped me, how you planned this pregnancy behind my back." "That's not true. We both—" "It's your word against mine, Sarah. Who do you think people will believe? The Indiana waitress with expensive taste or the Reeves family heir? Now, standing in the biting cold, Sarah pulled out her phone and stared at the banking app that had once shown a comfortable joint account balance. Where there had been thousands, there was now a glaring red negative number, 427.86, overdraft fees. Jonathan hadn't just emptied the accounts. He'd ensured she would start her new life in debt. With trembling fingers, she tried her credit card next, attempting to book a hotel room for the night. Card declined flashed on the screen, confirming what she already knew. Every financial lifeline had been severed. Sarah hailed a taxi, giving the driver Lauren's address, the only friend who might still take her in. During the ride, she frantically called the restaurant where she worked as a manager. "Antonio's office, please," she said when the hostess answered. "Sarah?" Antonio's Italian accent came through moments later. "Where are you? You missed the supplier meeting." "I'm so sorry, Antonio. There's been a personal emergency. Jonathan and I—" "Ah, yes," he interrupted, his voice suddenly cooler. "Your husband called this morning. He explained everything." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What did he explain exactly?" "That you've been having difficulties, emotional problems, that you might try to involve the restaurant in your personal issues." His voice softened slightly. "Look, Sarah, you're a good manager, but we can't have drama here. The investors are nervous. I think it's best if you take some time off. Paid leave, of course. Paid leave that would eventually become unpaid leave, then termination." Sarah knew how these things worked. By the time the taxi pulled up to Lauren's modest apartment building, Sarah had been effectively cut off from her job, her home, her finances, and most of her social circle. 3 voice messages from supposed friends had already arrived, each awkwardly explaining why they couldn't get involved in whatever was happening between her and Jonathan. "That'll be $27.50, the taxi driver said, interrupting her thoughts. Sarah handed over 30 of her precious dollars, telling him to keep the change. Money that should have been buying baby clothes was now paying for her escape from the life she thought she'd built. Lauren answered the door in pajamas, her face transitioning from surprise to concern. "Sarah? What's happened?" "Jonathan left me," Sarah said, the words still unreal. "He's filed for divorce. I've been evicted." She gestured to her suitcases. "I didn't know where else to go." Lauren's small 1-bedroom apartment became Sarah's temporary sanctuary. The couch that pulled out into an uncomfortable bed became her new home, the thin blanket a poor substitute for the Egyptian cotton sheets she'd grown accustomed to. "He can't just leave you with nothing," Lauren insisted as they sat at her tiny kitchen table that evening, mugs of tea growing cold between them. "You're pregnant with his child." "He made me sign a prenuptial agreement," Sarah explained, the humiliation burning fresh. "It said I leave with what I brought in if the marriage dissolves. I was so in love I didn't think—" "You need a lawyer," Lauren said firmly. The next morning, Sarah discovered exactly how thoroughly Jonathan had planned his exit. The lawyer she managed to see, the only one who would give her a free consultation, scrolled through the documents she brought with a deepening frown. "Mrs. Reeves." "Matthews," Sarah corrected quietly. "I'm going back to my maiden name." "Ms. Matthews, then. I'm sorry to tell you this, but these documents appear to be in order. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. Additionally," he adjusted his glasses, "these loan documents bear your signature, making you responsible for debts totaling nearly $50,000. "What loan documents? I never signed anything like that." The lawyer turned the papers toward her. There, at the bottom of each page, was what appeared to be her signature. "That's not my signature," Sarah whispered. "I mean, it looks like mine, but I never signed these." The lawyer's expression was sympathetic but skeptical. "Proving forgery is extremely difficult and expensive, Ms. Matthews, and from what you've told me about your husband's resources versus your current situation—" He didn't need to finish. Sarah understood. Jonathan had not only abandoned her, he had systematically ensured she would have no means to fight back. 3 weeks later, Lauren's patience was wearing thin. Though she never said it directly, her small size when stepping over Sarah's suitcases and the tension in her smile when coming home to find Sarah on her couch spoke volumes. "I need to find my own place," Sarah announced one evening. "I've found a job. 2, actually." The jobs were a far cry from her position as restaurant manager. During the day, she washed dishes at a diner near the hospital. At night, she cleaned offices in a corporate building downtown. The combined income would just barely cover rent for a tiny studio apartment in Cicero, a struggling suburb far from the gleaming lakefront towers where she had lived with Jonathan. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors arguing in Spanish, the ceiling stained from past water damage. But it was hers, paid for with her own money, and Jonathan couldn't take it away from her. On weekends, Sarah returned to what she knew best, picking up shifts as a waitress at a family restaurant, the same position Jonathan had so often mocked her for. "You'll always be that waitress from Indiana." His voice echoed in her head as she balanced plates along her arm, her pregnant belly now clearly visible beneath the unflattering uniform. Her feet swelled in the cheap non-slip shoes. Her back ached from double shifts. The other waitresses eyed her with curiosity but little sympathy. Another single mom-to-be, nothing unusual in their world. It was during her 6th month of pregnancy, while wiping down tables between the lunch and dinner rush, that Sarah felt her daughter move for the first time. A definitive kick, as if the tiny life inside her was reminding her mother of her presence. Sarah froze, one hand on her belly, the other clutching a damp rag. Tears welled in her eyes, but not of sadness. For the first time since Jonathan had walked out, she felt something like hope. "It's just us now, little one," she whispered, ignoring the curious glance from a busboy. "Just us against the world." That night, Sarah sat on her thin mattress on the floor of her studio apartment, making calculations in a worn notebook. Rent, utilities, food, baby clothes, diapers, formula. The numbers refused to add up to anything but desperation. "We need more," she told her unborn child, rubbing her belly. "And I'm going to get it for us." The next day, Sarah approached her manager at the office cleaning company. "I'd like more hours," she said. "Any building, any shift." "You sure?" he asked, eyeing her pregnant belly doubtfully. "The overnight shifts are rough, especially in your condition." "I'm sure," Sarah replied firmly. "I need the money." And so her routine became even more grueling. Days washing dishes, evenings waiting tables, nights scrubbing office floors. In between, she snatched moments of sleep when she could, often on buses between jobs. During one overnight shift, as she mopped the floor of an executive's office on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper, Sarah caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Backlit by the office lights, she could see her silhouette, rounded belly protruding, mop in hand, hair escaping from its ponytail. "You will never be the kind of woman a man like me needs by his side," Jonathan's words came back to her. Sarah straightened her back, looking out at the Chicago skyline glittering in the night. "No," she said aloud to her reflection. "I'll be better. I'll be the kind of woman who doesn't need a man like you at all." She felt another kick from her daughter, as if in agreement. During Turno's Duplos, with her feet swollen and her back aching, Sarah felt the first movements of her daughter. "It's just us two now, little one," she whispered while scrubbing floors at 2 in the morning. "But I'll give you the world, I promise." While counting coins to buy bread at the corner grocery store, Sarah couldn't have predicted that one day she would command a billion-dollar empire from the penthouse of a skyscraper her own company would build. Sarah shuffled down the narrow hallway of her apartment building at 4:30 in the morning, her swollen feet protesting each step. She paused at the top of the stairs, one hand bracing against the peeling wallpaper, the other cradling her 6-month pregnant belly. The elevator had been out of service for weeks, and 3 flights of stairs had become her daily mountain to climb. "Just a little longer," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "Mommy just needs to get through one more day." Outside, Chicago's winter darkness enveloped her as she waited for the bus, the wind cutting through her second-hand maternity coat. She'd found it at a thrift store, 3 sizes too large but only $8. The memory of her cashmere coats hanging in Jonathan's closet flashed through her mind, but she pushed it away. Those memories belonged to another life, another Sarah. The bus arrived 20 minutes late, already crowded with other early morning workers, house cleaners, hospital staff, construction workers. Sarah squeezed into the last remaining seat, offering a tired smile to the elderly woman beside her. "How far along?" the woman asked, nodding toward Sarah's belly. 26 weeks, Sarah replied, the maternal pride in her voice contrasting with the exhaustion in her eyes. "Working right up until the end, huh? I did the same with all 4 of mine." The woman's weathered hands twisted a simple gold band on her finger. Their father walked out when the youngest was still crawling. Had to do what needed doing. Sarah nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. The unspoken sisterhood of women who carried on when men walked away. By 5:30, Sarah was tying an apron around her expanded waistline in the kitchen of Louie's diner, a greasy spoon that catered to hospital staff from the medical center across the street. The smell of frying bacon and industrial dishwashing detergent made her stomach churn, but she swallowed hard and picked up her first stack of dirty plates. "Matthews, Table 6 needs clearing and the lunch prep hasn't started." Frank, the head cook, barked from behind the grill. His eyes softened slightly when they landed on her belly. "And for Christ's sake, take a break if you need to. Don't need you collapsing on my floor." Sarah nodded gratefully. Frank's gruff concern was the closest thing to kindness she'd found in her new reality. She attacked the mountain of dishes with methodical efficiency, her mind already calculating the hours until her next shift, the dollars until next month's rent, the weeks until her daughter would arrive. The morning rush brought a seemingly endless stream of plates, cups, and silverware. By 11, Sarah's back was on fire, a sharp pain radiating up from her tailbone. She leaned against the industrial sink, allowing herself 30 seconds of rest before straightening up again. "Taking your break now, Sarah?" asked Denise, the diner manager, poking her head into the kitchen. "Just catching my breath. I'll take it later when it's slower." Denise frowned. "You're pushing too hard. My sister was the same way when she was pregnant, ended up with bed rest for the last 2 months." "I can't afford bed rest," Sarah replied simply, picking up another tray of dirty dishes. During her actual break, Sarah sat in the alley behind the diner, eating leftover toast and eggs that a customer had barely touched. The shame of eating discarded food had faded weeks ago, replaced by practical hunger and the knowledge that her daughter needed every calorie she could provide. As she ate, she reviewed flashcards of basic accounting terminology, knowledge gleaned from the community college courses she'd started before meeting Jonathan. Her phone vibrated with a text from Lauren. "Got an interview! Marketing assistant at Thompson & Cober, fingers crossed." Sarah smiled, genuinely happy for her friend despite the pang of envy. Lauren had let her stay on that cramped sofa for nearly a month, a kindness Sarah wouldn't forget. At 2:30, Sarah clocked out from Louie's and boarded another bus, this time heading to her second job at Midwest Cleaning Services. There, she exchanged her food-stained apron for a blue polyester uniform with MCS embroidered on the pocket. The supervisor, a heavy-set man named Roy, eyed her growing belly with disapproval as he handed out assignments. "Matthews, you've got the Carson building tonight, 15th through 18th floors." He thrust a cart key into her hand. "Remember, bathrooms need special attention. They had complaints last week." The Carson building was one of the older office towers in the financial district, home to insurance companies and small legal firms. By 6 o'clock, most employees had left for the day, leaving Sarah alone with her cart of cleaning supplies and the occasional late-working executive who barely glanced her way. On the 17th floor, as she knelt painfully to scrub at a stubborn stain beneath a urinal in the men's bathroom, Sarah felt a strong kick from within. She paused, placing a gloved hand on her stomach. "I feel you, little one," she whispered, the echo of her voice bouncing off the tiled walls. "You're saying, Mom, this is gross. I know, baby, but it's honest work and it's putting a roof over our heads." Another kick, stronger this time. "You're right. We won't be doing this forever. Mommy had almost finished her business degree, you know. Before—" She didn't finish the sentence. There was no need to talk about before anymore. Only after mattered now. By midnight, Sarah's uniform was damp with sweat, her lower back throbbing with each movement. As she emptied a trash can in a corner office, far nicer than any space she'd ever work in herself, her eyes caught a framed photograph on the desk. A smiling family, father, mother, 2 children. The casual happiness of the image struck her like a physical blow. That night, Sarah arrived home at 1:30 in the morning, her feet so swollen that removing her shoes was an exercise in pain. She ate a peanut butter sandwich standing at her kitchenette counter, too exhausted to even sit down. The tiny studio apartment was sparsely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a folding table with 1 chair, a lamp without a shade. But it was clean. Meticulously so. Perhaps cleaning was the only part of her life she could control now. On weekends, Sarah returned to what she knew best: waiting tables. Gino's family restaurant was a far cry from the upscale establishments where she'd worked before meeting Jonathan. The food was mediocre, the tips modest, but the manager had hired her despite her pregnancy, understanding her desperate need for more hours. "Order up for table 7, called the cook, sliding plates across the pass-through window. Sarah balanced 3 plates up her arm, a skill that had never left her. As she delivered steaming platters of pasta to a family of 4, she caught the mother's eye drifting to her belly. "When are you due, honey?" the woman asked kindly. "August," Sarah replied with a practiced smile. "You shouldn't be on your feet all day," the woman scolded gently. "My daughter's a nurse. She says—" "Can we get more bread?" interrupted the husband, clearly impatient with the personal conversation. "Right away, sir," Sarah responded automatically, the smile never leaving her face, though it no longer reached her eyes. In the back hallway between the kitchen and dining room, Sarah leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing through a sharp pain in her side. A memory ambushed her. Jonathan at one of his business dinners, speaking about a server within earshot. "These people are practically furniture, darling. No need to thank them so profusely." She'd been embarrassed then by what she'd perceived as his social gaffe. Now she understood it had been a glimpse of his true character, a warning sign she'd chosen to ignore. The dinner rush stretched into evening, and Sarah's tips accumulated slowly in her apron pocket. Each dollar represented diapers, formula, the tiny necessities for the life growing inside her. During a rare lull, she calculated mentally, if she worked every available shift for the next 2 months, she might, just might, have enough saved for the basics her daughter would need. By closing time, Sarah's legs were trembling with fatigue. As she wiped down her last table, a sharp, sustained pain gripped her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. "Sarah?" Mario, the elderly owner, approached with concern. "You okay?" "Just tired," she managed, straightening with effort. "Long day." Mario's eyes narrowed skeptically. "My wife had 6 children. I know what contractions look like." "It's not contractions," Sarah insisted. "Just Braxton Hicks. False labor. The doctor mentioned it might happen." Mario insisted on calling her a cab, even paying for it from the register. No arguments. My mother would haunt me if I let a pregnant woman take the bus at midnight. At home, Sarah lowered herself carefully onto her mattress, not even bothering to change out of her uniform. The pain had subsided, but fear lingered. She was only 28 weeks along, too early for her daughter to arrive safely. "Stay put, little one," she murmured, rubbing slow circles on her belly. "We're not ready yet. I need more time to prepare for you." As if in response, she felt a reassuring movement. gentler than the earlier kicks. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. In these quiet moments, when it was just the two of them communicating in their private language of touches and movements, she found a peace that sustained her through the grueling days. "Somos só nós duas agora, pequena," she whispered in the Portuguese she'd learned during a study abroad year, another life ago. "We're just us two now, little one, but I'll give you the world, I promise." The promise hung in the air of the tiny apartment, a declaration of intent more binding than any marriage vow. Sarah's eyelids grew heavy, sleep finally claiming her as dawn approached. In a few short hours, she would rise again, return to her cycle of cleaning, serving, surviving. But something had shifted within her, a seed of determination taking root alongside the child in her womb. As she drifted off, Sarah could not know that in a crowded restaurant 3 days later, her body would finally surrender to the relentless strain. Nor could she imagine that her collapse onto the checkered floor would become the first step on a path that would lead her from this desperate struggle to heights of success beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible. The harsh fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital cast an unforgiving glow on Sarah's pale face as she blinked awake. Confusion washed over her, followed by a jolt of panic as her hands flew to her belly. "The baby!" she gasped, trying to sit up. "Easy there," came a gentle voice. A nurse with kind eyes gently pressed her back against the pillows. "Your little one is just fine. Strong heartbeat. Everything normal. It's you we've been worried about." Sarah sank back, relief flooding through her. The events that had led her here came back in fragments. The busy dinner rush at Gino's, the dizziness that had crept up suddenly, the sensation of the floor rushing up to meet her. Then nothing. "You fainted," explained the nurse, checking the IV dripping fluids into Sarah's arm. "Severe dehydration, exhaustion, and low blood pressure. Doctor says you've been pushing yourself way too hard." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened, revealing a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, with silver-streaked black hair and an air of quiet authority. She wore an expensive-looking charcoal pantsuit that made Sarah acutely aware of her own faded hospital gown. "You're awake. Good." The woman approached the bed. "I'm Barbara Winters. I was having dinner at Gino's when you collapsed. I rode with you in the ambulance." Sarah flushed with embarrassment. "You didn't have to do that. I'm sorry for ruining your dinner." Barbara waved away the apology. "I've had better meals and worse interruptions." She studied Sarah with shrewd eyes. "The nurse tells me you've been working 3 jobs, while 7 months pregnant." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "I don't have much choice." "There are always choices," Barbara replied, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "Some are just harder than others." She reached into her leather briefcase and extracted a folder. "While you were unconscious, I took the liberty of looking into your background. Hope you don't mind the invasion of privacy, but I was curious." Sarah tensed. "My background?" "Northwestern MBA program, incomplete. Fluent in Portuguese and conversational Spanish. Previous management experience at 2 upscale Chicago restaurants." Barbara listed these facts clinically. "So I have to ask, why are you washing dishes and scrubbing floors at 2 in the morning?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Sarah looked away, tears threatening. The nurse, sensing the tension, quietly excused herself. "Life happened," Sarah finally said, her voice barely audible. Barbara's expression softened. "Life has a way of doing that." She leaned forward. "Look, I run a small technology consulting firm. We help businesses optimize their operations using custom software solutions. I need an administrative assistant who can actually think, not just answer phones. When you're recovered and that baby is born, come see me." She placed a business card on the bedside table. "This isn't charity, it's business. I hate wasted potential." After Barbara left, Sarah held the embossed card under the harsh hospital lights, tracing the raised letters with her fingertip. Winter's Tech Solutions. For the first time in months, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life in her chest. August 15, 2008. The date would forever be etched in Sarah's memory. The day Emma Matthews came screaming into the world after 18 hours of labor. As the nurse placed the tiny red-faced bundle on Sarah's chest, time seemed to stand still. "Hello, Emma," Sarah whispered, counting perfect fingers and toes through her tears. "We made it." The world outside the delivery room was in chaos. The financial markets were crashing, and terms like subprime mortgage crisis dominated the news. But in that sterile hospital room cradling 7 pounds 3 ounces of determined life, Sarah found a center of perfect calm. 3 days later, she stood in her tiny apartment, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her body felt like a stranger's, soft and unfamiliar where it had once been firm. Emma slept in a second-hand bassinet beside her bed, making tiny, suckling movements with her lips even in sleep. Sarah opened the kitchen cabinet and stared at the single can of formula, her emergency backup if breastfeeding failed. $80 for the specialized kind the hospital had recommended. $80 that represented nearly a full day's wages. She calculated mentally how long she could stretch her meager savings before she'd need to return to work. 2 weeks. 2 precious weeks with her daughter before reality would come crashing back. Barbara Winters's office occupied the 10th floor of a modest building in Chicago's West Loop, far from the gleaming downtown towers, but still respectable. Sarah stood in the reception area, nervously adjusting Emma's blanket in the stroller beside her. At 6 weeks old, Emma was alert, her eyes, already showing hints of the hazel they would become, darting around the unfamiliar environment. "Ms. Winters will see you now," announced the receptionist, with a curious glance at the baby. Barbara's office was unexpectedly warm, both in temperature and decor. Bookshelves lined with technical manuals shared space with framed photographs of mountaineering expeditions. Barbara herself rose from behind a large desk, her handshake firm. "Sarah Matthews, and this must be the reason for your hospital stay." She peered into the stroller with undisguised interest. "She has your determination in her eyes already." "This is Emma," Sarah confirmed, then hesitated. "I should be up front. I don't have childcare arrangements yet. The wait list for subsidized daycare is 18 months long, and private options are currently beyond my means." Barbara studied her for a long moment. "Do you type quickly and accurately?" Taken aback by the non sequitur, Sarah nodded. 90 words per minute with 98% accuracy. "Can you maintain a calendar, prioritize emails, and tell people no without making enemies?" "Yes, I believe I can." "And will that baby scream through client calls?" Sarah looked down at Emma, who gazed back with solemn eyes. "She's generally quiet unless she's hungry or needs changing, but I can't promise." "Nobody can promise anything about babies," Barbara interrupted with a dismissive wave. "My sister has 5. They're all wild cards." She gestured to an alcove beside her office. "That space is currently storing obsolete servers and dust. Clear it out. Bring in whatever you need for the baby. You start Monday, 8 o'clock. Sarah blinked, uncertain she'd heard correctly. "You're hiring me? Just like that?" "This isn't charity, Sarah." Barbara repeated her words from the hospital. "I saw your resume. You're exactly what we need. The baby is simply a logistical consideration, not a disqualifier." Sarah's first day at Winter's Tech Solutions began at 5 in the morning, preparing bottles, packing diapers, and dressing both Emma and herself presentably on a budget that allowed for no new clothes. The bus ride downtown was a gauntlet of anxiety. Would Emma cry? Would the other passengers be annoyed? Would she arrive looking professional enough? By 8:15, she was settled at her new desk, a makeshift nursery created from office dividers forming a semi-private space beside her. Emma lay in a portable crib constructed from a large file box lined with soft blankets, her eyes wide as she studied the ceiling tiles above. "I see you've repurposed company property already," Barbara commented, appearing suddenly at Sarah's desk. But there was amusement in her eyes, not censure. The first week passed in a blur of new systems to learn, names to memorize, and baby schedules to maintain. Sarah often worked one-handed, cradling Emma against her shoulder while typing with her free hand. During conference calls, she learned to mute the line quickly when Emma fussed, and to change diapers with ninja-like stealth. Initially, some colleagues eyed the baby situation with skepticism, but Emma's solemn gaze and Sarah's quiet efficiency gradually won them over. Tom from accounting brought in a proper portable crib his grandchildren had outgrown. May from software development would occasionally hold Emma during lunch breaks, cooing to her in Mandarin. Early language exposure is excellent for cognitive development, she explained seriously. At night, Sarah's education truly began. After putting Emma to sleep, she would pull out her laptop, an ancient, sluggish machine she'd purchased from a pawn shop, and study. Technology news, market trends, basic programming concepts. Barbara had casually left books on her desk, just some light reading if you're interested, and Sarah devoured them, highlighting passages with a pen salvaged from a conference room. One night, as Sarah nursed Emma at 3 a.m, she watched a news report about the worsening economic crisis. Banks failing, jobs vanishing, lives upended. "The entire financial system is being rebuilt from the ground up," intoned the serious-faced reporter. Sarah looked down at her daughter, tiny hand curled around her finger. "If everything is being rebuilt," she whispered, "there's room for us to build something too." 3 months into her new position, Sarah received her first opportunity to truly prove herself. Barbara was out with the flu, and a critical client was threatening to cancel their contract over a miscommunication about project scope. "Ms. Winters isn't available, but perhaps I can help resolve this," Sarah said calmly into the phone while gently rocking Emma's carrier with her foot. 2 hours and 1 detailed spreadsheet later, she had not only salvaged the relationship, but expanded the contract's value by 20%. When Barbara returned the next day, she found a note summarizing the situation on her desk. "Not bad, Matthews," was all she said, but her approving nod spoke volumes. By Emma's 6-month birthday, Sarah had received her first raise and bonus. The money went immediately to a security deposit on a slightly larger apartment in a marginally better neighborhood, one with reliable heat and no cockroaches. "Look, Emma," she said, twirling her daughter around their new living room. 2 whole rooms! We're moving up in the world." That night, after tucking Emma into her crib, a real crib purchased with her bonus, Sarah opened her laptop and discovered an article about Jonathan Reeves's expanding real estate empire in New York. The photograph showed him at a charity gala, a slender blonde woman on his arm, his smile confident and untouched by the economic turmoil affecting most Americans. Sarah felt a familiar pain twist in her chest, but it was duller now, less consuming. She thought of Barbara's words from their first real conversation. "There are always choices. Some are just harder than others." In the quiet of her new apartment, with her daughter sleeping peacefully and a future slowly taking shape, Sarah opened a blank document on her laptop. With deliberate keystrokes, she typed, "One day, Jonathan Reeves will read about me in the Wall Street Journal and choke on his breakfast." As she wrote that promise at midnight, Sarah didn't imagine that in 15 years not only would Jonathan read about her, but the entire world would know her name as a synonym for innovation and extraordinary success. Sarah stared at the document on her screen, reading her promise one more time before saving it. The determination she felt when typing those words coursed through her veins like a new kind of strength. She closed her laptop and padded quietly to Emma's crib, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall in peaceful slumber. "We're just getting started," she whispered. The following morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. Barbara had mentioned a potential new client in the healthcare sector, and Sarah wanted to research their pain points before the introductory call. She settled Emma in her now customized office corner, complete with a proper playmat donated by May and sound-dampening panels Tom had salvaged from a renovation on the 14th floor. At 9:30, Sarah took a deep breath and knocked on Barbara's office door. "Come in," Barbara called, not looking up from her computer. "The Henderson healthcare call is in 30 minutes, Sarah said, placing a folder on her boss's desk. "I compiled some background information you might find useful. They've had 3 failed software implementations in the past year, and their CFO is particularly concerned about integration with their legacy systems." Barbara glanced up, her eyebrows raised slightly as she opened the folder. She scanned the contents, a hint of surprise crossing her face. "This is thorough," she said, flipping through the pages. "Where did you find their implementation history? That's not public information." Sarah straightened her posture. "I called their administrative office posing as a vendor verification service. Their assistant was quite helpful." A slow smile spread across Barbara's face. "Resourceful. I like it." She closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "How would you feel about sitting in on this call? Not just taking notes, actually participating?" "I'd like that very much," Sarah replied, trying to contain her excitement. The call went better than either of them could have anticipated. When the Henderson CFO expressed concerns about cost overruns, Sarah smoothly interjected with a detailed breakdown of how Winters Tech's methodology prevented scope creep. By the end of the hour, Henderson Healthcare had not only agreed to a follow-up meeting but requested specifically that Ms. Matthews be present. As they hung up, Barbara swiveled her chair to face Sarah directly. That wasn't luck. That was skill. She tapped her fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "I think it's time we discussed your future here." 3 weeks later, Sarah received her new business cards. Sarah Matthews, Project Coordinator. The promotion came with a modest salary increase and, more importantly, direct client contact. Emma, now 10 months old, celebrated by saying her first word, not mama as Sarah had secretly hoped, but book, clear as day, while patting the colorful story Sarah read to her each night. "Book?" Sarah repeated, astonished. "Did you just say book?" Emma grinned, revealing her 2 bottom teeth, and emphatically slapped the cardboard page again. "Book!" Sarah laughed with delight. "Of course your first word would be book. You're going to be brilliant." As project coordinator, Sarah's responsibilities expanded significantly. She now managed client communications, coordinated between developers and end users, and tracked project milestones. The work was challenging and often stretched late into the evening, with Emma sleeping under Sarah's coat on the office sofa while her mother finalized deliverable schedules and troubleshot implementation issues. One night, as they were the last 2 remaining in the office, Barbara paused by Sarah's desk on her way out. "You know, most people in your situation would have taken the easy way out," she remarked, watching Emma sleep peacefully among the stack of project binders. Sarah looked up from her spreadsheet. "What do you mean?" "Single mother, abandoned during pregnancy, starting over from scratch." Barbara shrugged. "Most would have given up, taken welfare, blamed the world for their circumstances. You didn't." Sarah glanced at her daughter. "I couldn't, not with her watching me." Barbara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Go home, Sarah. The projections can wait until morning." By Emma's first birthday, Sarah had established a rhythm. Up at 5 to study, drop Emma at the small in-home daycare she could now afford 2 days a week, work until 6, pick up Emma, dinner, bath, story time, and then more work after Emma fell asleep. It was exhausting but sustainable, and each small success at work felt like a step further away from the woman who had once been discarded as worthless. In February of 2010, Sarah was invited to present a proposal to a potential client, a mid-sized manufacturing company looking to optimize their supply chain. It would be her first solo presentation, with Barbara attending only as an observer. The night before, Sarah practiced in front of her bathroom mirror, Emma watching curiously from her playpen in the hallway. "Our solution integrates seamlessly with your existing infrastructure," Sarah rehearsed, trying to project confidence despite her nerves. Emma clapped her hands together, an encouraging audience of one. The presentation went better than Sarah had dared to hope. Her detailed understanding of the client's pain points, combined with practical solutions that acknowledged budget constraints, resonated with the executive team. When the manufacturing company's CEO shook her hand afterward and said, "You understand exactly what we need," Sarah felt a surge of professional pride unlike anything she'd experienced before. On the elevator ride down, Barbara was uncharacteristically quiet. "Was something wrong with my presentation?" Sarah finally asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Barbara shook her head. "No, quite the opposite. I'm just realizing I may need to accelerate my timeline." "Timeline for what?" "For your future," Barbara replied cryptically, leaving Sarah to wonder what she meant. That question was answered 6 months later when Sarah was called into Barbara's office and offered a promotion to operations manager. The role came with a substantial salary increase, her own office, and responsibility for all internal processes at Winters Tech. "You've earned this," Barbara said, sliding the offer letter across her desk. "You have a natural talent for seeing the big picture while not losing sight of the details. That's rare." That weekend, Sarah and Emma moved into a new apartment, still modest, but in a safer neighborhood with better schools. As they unpacked their few belongings, Sarah hung her Northwestern MBA acceptance letter on the wall alongside her new business card and a finger painting Emma had created at daycare. "Is that your office, Mommy?" 2-year-old Emma asked, pointing to the business card. "Yes, sweetheart. And someday, if you want, you'll have your own office too. Or whatever else you dream of having." Emma nodded seriously, as if filing this information away for future reference. As operations manager, Sarah quickly identified inefficiencies in how Winters Tech handled client onboarding. She developed new protocols that reduced implementation time by 30% and increased client satisfaction scores. Barbara, watching from the sidelines, seemed pleased but not surprised by these improvements. During this period, Emma was developing at an astonishing rate. At 3, she could count to 100, write her name, and solve simple puzzles designed for children twice her age. Sarah recognized in her daughter not just her own determination, but also the analytical mind and focus that, painful as it was to admit, came from Jonathan. When Emma frowned in concentration over a particularly challenging puzzle, the resemblance was unmistakable. "You're just like your daddy when you make that face," Sarah said once, the words escaping before she could stop them. Emma looked up, curiosity bright in her eyes. "Where is my daddy?" Sarah froze, unprepared for the innocent question. "He lives far away, sweetie. He couldn't be with us." "Why not?" "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that are hard to understand," Sarah answered carefully. "But it doesn't matter, because we have each other." Emma seemed to accept this explanation, returning to her puzzle with renewed determination. But Sarah knew the questions would return someday, more insistent and difficult to deflect. In the summer of 2012, Barbara invited Sarah to dinner at an upscale restaurant, the kind of place Sarah had once frequented with Jonathan. As they waited for their entrees, Barbara seemed uncharacteristically reflective. "I've been doing this for 27 years, she said, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "Built this company from nothing, survived 2 recessions, saw technologies come and go. It's been a good run." "You sound like you're saying goodbye," Sarah observed, suddenly alert. Barbara smiled. "Perceptive as always. I'm 65, Sarah. I want to travel, read books that aren't about software architecture, maybe learn to paint. I'm ready for my next chapter." "The company will need new leadership," Barbara finished for her. "Someone who understands both the technical and human sides of the business. Someone with vision, determination, and the ability to build something greater than what exists now." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Barbara, are you saying—" "I want you to buy the company, Sarah." Barbara set down her glass. "Not immediately. I'm not dumping it in your lap tomorrow. But over the next 5 years. I'll finance it myself, with terms that make sense for someone in your position. You'll transform it into something extraordinary. I'm certain of that." Sarah sat in stunned silence, emotions washing over her in waves. 4 years ago, she had been pregnant, abandoned, scrubbing toilets at midnight to survive. Now she was being offered the chance to own the company where she'd rebuilt her life. "Why me?" she finally asked. "You could sell to a competitor, get a much better price." Barbara leaned forward. "Because money isn't everything, and legacy matters. I didn't build Winters Tech to see it absorbed by some soulless corporation. I built it to solve problems and create opportunities." She smiled warmly. "Also, I've never seen anyone work harder than you, or care more deeply about doing things right." As Sarah signed the documents to acquire her first company, she had no idea she was laying the cornerstone of what would become one of the largest business empires built by a woman in American history. The signed acquisition papers sat on Sarah's desk, her signature still fresh on the dotted line. She ran her fingers over the embossed letterhead, Winters Tech Solutions. Except now, the papers beside it outlined the gradual transition to Matthews Consulting. Her company. The thought still felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "So, boss lady," Barbara said from the doorway, a rare smile softening her features. "What's your first executive decision?" Sarah looked up, determination replacing the momentary disbelief. "We need a company meeting. Everyone, today at 4. That afternoon, Sarah stood before the 15 employees of what was now her company. Knees trembling beneath her modest pencil skirt, she gripped the edge of the conference table to steady herself. "As you all know, Barbara has decided to transition toward retirement," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. "Over the next 5 years, I'll be taking over ownership of the company." She paused, surveying the faces before her, some curious, others concerned. "I want to be clear about my vision. We're going to expand beyond just implementing other people's technology. We're going to innovate." Later that night, after tucking a 4-year-old Emma into bed, Sarah spread market research reports across her small dining table. The economy was still recovering from the recession, leaving countless businesses struggling to adapt. But where others saw only problems, Sarah recognized opportunity. "The energy sector," she murmured to herself, highlighting passages about failing renewable startups. Companies with promising technology were folding daily, unable to secure financing in the tight credit market. Their patents and intellectual property, potentially revolutionary innovations, were being auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. Sarah created a spreadsheet, tracking bankruptcies and asset liquidations in the renewable energy space. 2 weeks later, she found herself at a courthouse auction, the only woman in a room full of investment bankers and corporate vultures. "Lot 17, announced the auctioneer. "Solar concentration patent portfolio from SunDirect Technologies. Opening bid at $15,000. Sarah raised her paddle, ignoring the sideways glances from men in expensive suits. 3 minutes and 7 bids later, she owned her first patent portfolio for $22,000, nearly all the business capital she had managed to secure. "Good luck making anything with that, sweetheart," sneered a gray-haired executive as the room emptied. "SunDirect went under because that technology is fundamentally flawed." Sarah smiled politely. Perhaps they just lacked the right perspective. Back at the office, she pinned the patent documents to her wall and began researching engineering talent. The recession had left countless brilliant minds unemployed, particularly in struggling green technology firms. Sarah created job listings offering modest salaries but something potentially more valuable: equity in what she was building. Her first hire was Dr. Raymond Chen, a solar efficiency expert who had been stocking shelves at a hardware store since his previous employer folded. He studied the SunDirect patents skeptically. "There's a reason they failed," he said, pointing to technical diagrams. "The heat transfer mechanism is inefficient at scale." "But what if we weren't trying to scale it the same way?" Sarah asked. "What if we went smaller, not larger?" Chen raised an eyebrow. Distributed generation instead of centralized? That's actually interesting. Within 6 months, Sarah had assembled a team of 7 engineers, all from failed startups, all brilliant, all working in a cramped corner of the Matthews consulting office. They shared a single whiteboard where Sarah had sketched her vision, a system she called EnerGrid, designed to allow communities to generate and distribute their own energy through interconnected microgrids. The problem with current systems, Sarah explained during a late-night strategy session, is they're either massive infrastructure projects requiring huge capital or they're individual solutions that don't create community resilience. Emma sat quietly in the corner of the conference room, assembling complex puzzles while the adults worked. Occasionally, she would look up, observing the animated discussions with solemn curiosity. That evening, as Sarah served dinner in their modest apartment, Emma asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Why don't I have a daddy like Lily and Marcus?" Sarah set down her fork, choosing her words carefully. "Families come in all different shapes, sweetheart. Some have a mommy and daddy, some have 2 mommies or 2 daddies, and some, like us, have just a mommy." Emma frowned, processing this information. "But where is my daddy? Did he die?" "No, honey, he didn't die." Sarah took a deep breath. "Your father wasn't ready to be a daddy. Some people aren't prepared for that responsibility. Wasn't I good enough for him to want to be my daddy?" Emma's voice was small, her eyes downcast. The question pierced Sarah's heart. "Oh, Emma, no. It was never about you. You are perfect, absolutely perfect. Your father, he made his choice before he even met you. It was about him, not you, never you." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied for the moment, but Sarah knew this conversation was just beginning. As her daughter grew, the questions would become more complex, more difficult to answer without revealing the painful truth. Meanwhile, the EnerGrid concept was evolving rapidly. Late one night, Sarah stayed at the office reviewing photographs of impoverished communities where energy costs consumed up to 40% of household income. Families choosing between electricity and food, schools unable to operate computers due to unreliable power. "There has to be a better way," she murmured, spreading the images across her desk. Then it hit her, the connection between 2 seemingly incompatible technologies in their patent portfolio. She frantically sketched a new configuration, a way to combine thermal storage with small-scale photovoltaics to create a system that could provide consistent power even when the sun wasn't shining. The next morning, she burst into the engineering room, waving her drawings. "I think I've got it!" Dr. Chen studied her sketches, eyes widening. "This shouldn't work," he said slowly, "but I think it might. The thermal battery concept combined with the distributed architecture." He looked up at Sarah with newfound respect. "We need to build a prototype." Over the next year, Matthews Consulting continued its steady business implementing technology solutions, but every spare dollar went into developing the EnerGrid prototype. Sarah pitched the concept to potential investors, seeking the capital needed to move from theory to reality. "It's too speculative," said the first venture capitalist. "The energy market is too regulated," argued the second. "Come back when you have a working prototype," suggested the third. 27 rejections later, Sarah sat in her office calculating how much more the company could invest in EnerGrid before risking financial stability. The answer was clear: not enough. That night, she made the most difficult financial decision since starting over after Jonathan left her. She would mortgage her recently purchased small condo and liquidate her modest savings to finance the prototype herself. "Are you certain?" Barbara asked when Sarah shared her plan. Though semi-retired, Barbara still served as an advisor. "That's everything you've built as a safety net." "I've started from nothing before," Sarah replied quietly. "I can do it again if necessary, but this technology could change lives." As the prototype development accelerated, 7-year-old Emma was showing remarkable aptitude for mathematics and logical thinking. Her second-grade teacher had requested a meeting to discuss moving her to advanced classes. "She's solving problems at a fifth-grade level," the teacher explained, "and she's particularly interested in how things work, always asking questions about systems and connections." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with wistful recognition. Emma's analytical mind reminded her of Jonathan. It was a genetic gift he had unknowingly bestowed upon his daughter. One evening, as Sarah reviewed financial projections on her tablet, Emma peered over her shoulder, pointing at a news sidebar featuring a familiar face. "Mommy, this man has the same last name I would have had," she said, finger resting on an image of Jonathan Reeves at a property development announcement in Manhattan. Sarah froze, unprepared for this moment. The article headline read, "Reeves Properties Expands Luxury Portfolio Despite Market Concerns." "Yes," she finally answered, her voice steady. "That's Jonathan Reeves. He's your biological father." Emma studied the image with unsettling intensity. "He looks like me around the eyes." "He does," Sarah agreed, waiting for the flood of questions she anticipated would follow. Instead, Emma simply nodded thoughtfully. "I think I like being Emma Matthews better. Matthews Consulting sounds more important than Reeves Properties." Sarah pulled her daughter close, heart overflowing with love for this remarkable child who somehow always found the perfect thing to say. The Energrid prototype was nearly complete when Sarah received a call that changed everything. The mayor of Millfield, Indiana, a struggling town just 30 miles from where she had grown up, had heard about their project through a mutual connection. "We're facing a budget crisis," Mayor Thompson explained. "Energy costs for municipal buildings are crippling us, and our residents are choosing between heating their homes and feeding their families. We've been following your work, Ms. Matthews. Would you consider implementing your first system here?" Sarah gripped the phone tightly, emotion welling in her throat. Millfield was exactly the type of community she had designed Energrid to help, and its proximity to her roots felt like destiny. "We would be honored," she replied, "but I should warn you, this would be our first full implementation. There are risks." "Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards," the mayor replied. "Besides, Indiana folks take care of their own. We'd be proud to support a hometown success story." As she hung up the phone, Sarah couldn't help but recall Jonathan's dismissive words, "You'll always be that waitress from Indiana." Now she would return to those Indiana roots not as a waitress but as an innovator bringing economic hope to a struggling community. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very heritage Jonathan had mocked would now be the launching pad for a technology that could revolutionize energy access across America. As she accepted the opportunity to implement her first project in the same region where she had been considered just a girl from Indiana, Sarah couldn't imagine she was planting the seed of an energy revolution that would, in 8 years, transform her name into a synonym for sustainable innovation throughout the country. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Sarah stood at the podium, scissors in hand, ready to cut the ceremonial ribbon stretched across the control station of Millfield's first Energrid system. Behind her, solar panels gleamed in the morning sun, while thermal storage units, disguised as attractive landscaping features, dotted the municipal complex. "Today marks not just a new chapter for Millfield," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd of townspeople, "but a vision of what's possible when communities take energy independence into their own hands." As the ribbon fell in 2 pieces, cheers erupted from the assembled crowd. Sarah caught Emma's eye in the front row, her daughter beaming with pride, holding a small notebook where she'd been sketching the components of the system all morning. Mayor Thompson enveloped Sarah in an unexpected hug, his weathered face creased with emotion. "You don't understand what you've done for us," he whispered. "This system will save our town nearly $200,000 this year alone. You've saved Millfield from bankruptcy." The data backed his enthusiasm. The pilot Energrid system had been operational for just 2 weeks during testing, and already the municipal complex had reduced its energy costs by 78%. More importantly, The excess energy generated was being directed to the town's community center, which now offered a warm room program for elderly residents struggling to heat their homes. As the crowd dispersed toward the refreshment tables, a local reporter approached Sarah, recorder in hand. "Ms. Matthews, there are rumors that 3 other municipalities have already reached out about implementing similar systems. Is Matthews Consulting planning to expand?" Sarah smiled diplomatically. "We're evaluating several opportunities. The success here in Millfield demonstrates what's possible when innovative technology meets community needs." The reporter scribbled frantically. "Some energy industry analysts are calling your approach revolutionary. How does it feel to be potentially disrupting a trillion-dollar market?" Before Sarah could answer, Emma tugged at her blazer. "Mom, Mr. Chen says there's a fluctuation in the thermal exchange rate. He wants you to see the dashboard." "Excuse me," Sarah told the reporter, grateful for the interruption. "Duty calls." The dashboard showed exactly what Sarah had predicted during development. The system was actually performing above specifications, requiring a recalibration of the monitoring parameters. As she made the adjustments, she felt a surge of validation. The technology worked, not just in theory or in limited lab tests, but in the real world, helping real people. 3 months after the Millfield inauguration, the first industry magazine cover arrived on Sarah's desk. Matthews Innovation, Revolutionizing Community Energy. The article detailed how the small consultancy had pivoted into clean energy technology with a solution uniquely positioned for struggling municipalities. Sarah had renamed the company Matthews Innovation shortly after the Millfield success, a subtle but significant shift that reflected their evolution from implementing others' technologies to creating their own. The original 15 employees had grown to 50, then 200 as orders poured in from towns and cities facing budget crises across the Midwest. They had outgrown their original office space within 6 months of the Millfield launch. Sarah now stood in their new headquarters, an entire floor of a commercial building in Chicago's Innovation District. Glass-walled conference rooms had replaced cramped cubicles, and a dedicated lab space allowed the engineering team to refine and improve the EnerGrid technology. "Mom, I fixed it!" Emma's voice carried across the office as the 10-year-old raced toward Sarah's office, laptop clutched in her hands. Behind her, Dr. Chen followed, an expression of bemused admiration on his face. "Fixed what, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, clearing space on her desk for Emma's computer. "The distribution algorithm was causing those micro outages in the Clearwater installation," Emma explained, turning the screen to show a simple but elegant piece of code. "See? The system was trying to optimize too frequently. I created a buffer that allows for smoother transitions." Dr. Chen shrugged helplessly. "I've been working on that problem for 3 days. She solved it in an hour." Sarah examined the code, impressed but not entirely surprised. Emma's aptitude for mathematics and logic had evolved into a genuine talent for programming. Her school had already moved her up 2 grade levels in math and science, and she still completed assignments with ease. "This is brilliant, Emma," Sarah said, pride warming her voice. "Would you like to implement it yourself?" Emma's eyes widened. "Can I? Really?" "Under Dr. Chen's supervision," Sarah qualified, exchanging a smile with the engineer. "But yes, it's your solution. You should see it through." That evening, as they walked home to their new condominium, a spacious 3-bedroom with views of Lake Michigan, Emma skipped ahead, chattering about the implementation plan for her algorithm fix. "When I grow up, I want to run the company with you," she declared, waiting for Sarah at a crosswalk. "We'll be Matthews and Matthews." Sarah's heart swelled. "That sounds perfect. But remember, you can be anything you want to be." "I know," Emma replied with the confidence of a child who had never been told otherwise. "But I want to build things that help people like you do." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah stood at her living room window, gazing at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there were the high-rise apartments where she had once lived with Jonathan, thinking that was the pinnacle of success, being the wife of a wealthy man. Now she understood true success, creating something meaningful, something entirely her own. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Mayor of Chicago confirmed for tomorrow's meeting. Full council will attend presentation. Sarah took a deep breath. The city of Chicago was considering implementing EnerGrid systems in multiple neighborhoods, starting with areas where residents faced the highest energy burdens. If secured, it would be their largest contract yet, and a statement that Matthews Innovation had arrived as a serious player in the energy sector. The following day, Sarah stood before the Chicago City Council, presenting slides that showed the dramatic success of EnerGrid implementations in 12 cities across 3 states. As she explained the financial and social benefits, she noticed a familiar face in the audience, a banker who had once dismissed her funding application with condescending amusement. In conclusion, Sarah said, maintaining eye contact with the banker, Matthews Innovation doesn't just offer energy savings. We provide energy justice, ensuring that communities control their own resources rather than being subject to the whims of traditional utility monopolies. The presentation was met with enthusiastic questions, and by the time Sarah left City Hall, she had a verbal commitment for a pilot program in 3 Chicago neighborhoods. As her car pulled away from the curb, her phone rang. It was Barbara, calling from a beach in Portugal where she was enjoying her well-earned retirement. I just read about the Davenport implementation, Barbara said without preamble. 6,000 households with reduced energy costs. Sarah, do you realize what you've built in just 2 years? We're just getting started, Sarah replied, watching the Chicago skyline through the car window. How's retirement? Glorious. Though I admit I check your stock valuation more often than I should. Sarah laughed. Old habits die hard. Speaking of which, Barbara's tone shifted, becoming more serious. Have you considered taking the company public? With your growth trajectory and the social impact metrics, you could attract significant capital. The question wasn't unexpected. Several venture capital firms had approached Sarah in recent months, offering funding in exchange for equity. She had rejected them all, unwilling to cede control of her vision. But an IPO, that was different. It would provide the capital needed for global expansion while allowing her to maintain direction of the company. I've been speaking with some investment banks, Sarah admitted. The timing might be right within the next 6 to 8 months. The preparations for going public consumed the next year of Sarah's life. Investment bankers, attorneys, accountants, and consultants filed through Matthews Innovation's headquarters, conducting due diligence, preparing financial statements, and drafting the prospectus that would introduce the company to Wall Street. Throughout the process, Emma remained a grounding presence, her straightforward questions often cutting through the financial jargon to the heart of matters. One evening, as Sarah reviewed complex valuation models at their dining table, Emma peered over her shoulder. So people will pay money for pieces of our company because they think it will be worth more later, she asked. Essentially, yes, Sarah confirmed. Emma considered this. But we'll still be the ones deciding what the company does, right? They don't get to tell us how to help people? Sarah hugged her daughter. That's exactly right, and that's why the structure of the IPO is so important. On the morning Matthews Innovation was set to go public, Sarah and Emma stood in their living room watching CNBC's coverage of the market opening. Emma had insisted on wearing a dress for the occasion, though they were viewing remotely rather than ringing the bell in person. Sarah had wanted Emma's school routine disrupted as little as possible. Matthews Innovation, trading under the symbol MTIV, will begin trading when markets open, the announcer explained. The clean energy company priced its offering at $42 per share, above the expected range of $36 to $40, reflecting strong investor demand. Sarah held her breath as the first trades appeared on the screen. The stock immediately jumped to $55, then $60, then $70 in a matter of minutes. Is that good? Emma asked, eyes wide. Sarah nodded, momentarily speechless. By mid-morning, Matthews Innovation shares were trading at $138, a staggering 328% increase from the IPO price. Text messages flooded Sarah's phone from employees who had received stock options as part of their compensation, many of whom had just become millionaires on paper. That evening, as financial news programs dissected Matthews Innovations' extraordinary market debut, Sarah received an email from Barbara containing only a screenshot of Sarah's bank account balance and the words, "Proud doesn't begin to cover it." Sarah stared at the number on the screen, trying to comprehend its meaning. In a single day, her net worth had increased to 9 figures. The girl who had once been evicted onto a freezing Chicago sidewalk with $200 to her name was now, by any definition, extraordinarily wealthy. But as she tucked Emma into bed that night, Sarah knew the true value of what she had built wasn't measured in dollars. It was in the communities now paying less for cleaner energy. It was in the team she had assembled, many of whom had been overlooked or undervalued elsewhere. And most of all, it was in the example she was setting for her daughter, that with determination and vision, it was possible to transform rejection into remarkable success. As the screens in Times Square displayed the surprising market value of Matthews' innovation, Sarah didn't know that her new visibility would put her on a collision course with the past she had left behind, in a confrontation no one could predict. The morning news coverage of Matthews Innovations' extraordinary market debut continued for weeks, catapulting Sarah from successful entrepreneur to business celebrity almost overnight. Financial analysts who had never heard her name now dissected her business strategies on cable news. Industry publications that had once ignored her emails now begged for exclusive interviews. 5 years after that transformative IPO, Sarah stood on the helipad atop the gleaming 60-story Matthews Tower in downtown Chicago. The spring wind whipped her carefully styled hair as she watched the approaching helicopter, its blades slicing through the early morning air. Behind her, a team of executives waited, tablets and portfolios clutched in nervous hands. The helicopter touched down with precision, its door sliding open to reveal Craig Jennings, Matthews Innovations' new director of Asian operations, returning from a 2-week trip to Singapore with news Sarah was eager to hear. "The deal is done," Craig announced as he ducked beneath the slowing rotors, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "The Singapore government signed off this morning. We break ground on the first Southeast Asian Energrid implementation next month." Sarah nodded, professional satisfaction warming her chest. "Excellent work. Let's move the discussion inside, shall we? The team is eager for details." At 43, Sarah Matthews had mastered the art of contained excitement. The woman who had once wept with joy over a modest raise now responded to billion-dollar deals with measured smiles and strategic questions. Her tailored Armani suit and deliberately understated jewelry conveyed exactly what she intended. Here was a woman whose power required no flashy advertisement. The Matthews Tower, a LEED Platinum-certified marvel of sustainable architecture, housed the headquarters of what had become an energy empire valued at $8.7 billion. From her office on the 56th floor, Sarah could see the Lake Michigan shoreline where, 15 years earlier, she had walked in desperate circles, pregnant and abandoned, trying to figure out how she would survive the week. "The board meeting will begin in 5 minutes, Ms. Matthews," her executive assistant announced through the intercom. "They're assembled in the main conference room." "Thank you, Jennifer," Sarah replied, gathering her materials. "And has Dr. Hirsch confirmed for the 3 o'clock video call with Emma?" "Yes, he and the MIT team are all set up. Emma sent a message that she'll be joining from the physics lab." Sarah smiled. Her daughter, now 15, was thriving in MIT's special program for exceptional young minds. Emma's algorithm for optimizing energy distribution across microgrids was already being implemented in Matthews Innovations' newest systems, improving efficiency by an additional 12%, a breakthrough that seasoned engineers with decades of experience hadn't achieved. The board meeting proceeded with the precision of a well-rehearsed orchestra. Quarterly earnings had exceeded projections by 17%. The company's presence had expanded to 43 states, with international operations growing in Europe and now Asia. Most significantly, their community impact program had reached a milestone. 15,000 families in low-income communities now received free or heavily subsidized energy through Matthews Innovation Systems. "I'd like to direct your attention to the acquisition section of your packets," Sarah said, turning to page 23 of the bound presentation. "As you can see, we've completed the acquisition of 3 regional real estate development companies at very favorable terms." Richard Olmsted, the 70-year-old venture capitalist who had been an early investor, raised an eyebrow. "Real estate, Sarah? That's a departure from our core business." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the concern. "A strategic departure. These properties include land parcels ideally situated for our next generation of urban energrid installations. Additionally, the existing buildings can be retrofitted as demonstration sites. The diversification also helps shield us from sector-specific downturns." What Sarah didn't mention was that the acquisition team had brought these particular companies to her attention because they were distressed assets selling significantly below market value. The due diligence reports and financial analyses had been compelling enough that she hadn't scrutinized the ownership details beyond confirming they were legitimate businesses with salvageable assets. "These Reeves properties were particularly poorly managed," commented Elaine Cho, Matthews Innovations CFO. "Their debt-to-equity ratio was catastrophic. We acquired them for approximately 30 cents on the dollar." Sarah made a note on her tablet. "Ensure the transition teams handle the employee situations with our usual care. I want to retain as many staff as possible, particularly the maintenance and facility management personnel." "Of course," Elaine nodded. "We'll follow the standard Matthews integration protocol." After the meeting, Sarah returned to her office to prepare for the video call with Emma. She adjusted the large monitor on her desk, smiling as her daughter's face appeared, framed by the sterile white walls of an MIT laboratory. "Mom, wait till you see what we've done with the thermal exchange algorithm." Emma's enthusiasm radiated through the screen. At 15, she was the perfect blend of Sarah's determination and Jonathan's analytical precision, a combination that sometimes gave Sarah a bittersweet pang when she recognized Jonathan's expressions or mannerisms in their daughter. "Show me," Sarah said, leaning forward with genuine interest as Emma shared her screen, walking through complex calculations and code that, despite Sarah's technical knowledge, pushed the boundaries of her understanding. "Dr. Hirsch thinks this could improve cold weather performance by 23%, Emma concluded, her eyes bright with excitement. "That's extraordinary, Em. I'm so proud of you." Emma's expression shifted slightly, a familiar crease appearing between her brows. "The Clinton Foundation Gala invitation arrived at my dorm yesterday. Do we really have to go to that, Mom? I have midterms the following week." Sarah sighed. The annual Clinton Foundation Gala in New York was one of the most prestigious social and philanthropic events of the year. Matthews Innovation had been selected to receive an award for their community energy program, and Sarah's presence was non-negotiable. "It's important, sweetie. Our community program is getting national visibility, which means more funding partners and potentially more families we can help. Besides," she added with a gentle smile, "you can study on the plane." Emma rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Fine, but I'm not wearing anything with sequins or ruffles." "Deal. We'll go shopping when you're home next weekend." After the call ended, Sarah walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, gazing out at the Chicago skyline now dotted with energrid installations, distinctive solar arrays and elegant thermal storage units that had become status symbols for forward-thinking buildings. From this height, she could see the apartment building where she had once lived with Jonathan, now dwarfed by newer developments. Jennifer's voice came through the intercom again. "Ms. Matthews, your 4 o'clock with the PR team about the Clinton Foundation Award is ready." The public relations team had prepared a comprehensive strategy for leveraging the award for maximum impact. As they walked Sarah through the media opportunities and speaking points, she found her attention drifting to a notification that appeared on her tablet, a financial news alert about struggles in the luxury real estate market. Many high-end developers overextended during the boom years, the analyst was quoted saying. Now they're facing a perfect storm of rising interest rates, changing luxury buyer preferences, and increased competition. Sarah swiped the notification away, returning her focus to the PR presentation. She didn't notice the small photograph accompanying the article. Jonathan Reeves at a shareholders' meeting, looking considerably more strained than the confident man who had once told her she would never be enough. Later that evening, as Sarah's private car took her home to her lakefront penthouse, she reviewed the final details for Emma's weekend visit. Her daughter would be flying in on Friday, and Sarah had cleared her schedule to spend quality time together. Between Emma's accelerated academic program and Sarah's demanding role as CEO, these moments had become precious. At home, Sarah kicked off her heels and poured a glass of wine, settling onto her terrace with its panoramic view of Lake Michigan, the same lake she had gazed at from a very different vantage point 15 years ago, pregnant and devastated, wondering how she would survive. Now she controlled an empire that stretched across continents, employing thousands and changing how communities accessed energy. Her phone chimed with a text from Emma. Finished lab early. Working on new optimization ideas. Love you. Sarah smiled, typing back, Love you more. Don't forget to eat. 3 days later, Emma arrived in Chicago, bringing with her the whirlwind energy that always transformed Sarah's carefully ordered home. Books and papers spread across the dining table, half-finished mugs of tea appeared on every surface, and the sound of classical music, Emma's preferred background for problem-solving, filled the penthouse. I've narrowed down my dress options for this gala thing, Emma announced over breakfast on Saturday. Nothing that screams trying too hard but still appropriate for receiving a prestigious award. Sarah laughed. Very diplomatic. We'll find something perfect. Later that day, mother and daughter stood in the private shopping suite of Chicago's most exclusive department store, evaluating options presented by a personal stylist. The midnight blue Alexander McQueen would be stunning on you, Ms. Matthews, suggested the stylist, presenting a sleek gown with architectural details. And for Miss Emma, perhaps this gold Marchesa? Emma ran her fingers over the delicate fabric of the gold dress, her expression thoughtful. It's beautiful, she admitted. Will I be presentable enough to represent Matthews' innovation? Something in her phrasing made Sarah pause, a distant echo of words spoken in cruelty years ago reverberating in her mind. But Emma's context was entirely different. Her question came from a place of respect for the company, not from insecurity or judgment. You always represent me perfectly, Em, Sarah said softly, touching her daughter's cheek. You're the proof that I made the right decision. The stylist, sensing a private moment, discreetly stepped away to retrieve more options. That evening, as Sarah finalized preparations for their trip to New York, her assistant called with last-minute details about the award ceremony and their accommodations. The jet will be ready at 9 tomorrow morning, Jennifer confirmed. The Four Seasons has prepared the usual suite, and the foundation has requested you arrive an hour before the ceremony for photos and a brief interview. Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. After hanging up, Sarah joined Emma on the terrace, where her daughter was using a tablet to review data from her latest project. The Chicago lights twinkled below them, a constellation of human endeavor spread at their feet. We've come a long way, haven't we? Sarah said, more to herself than to Emma. Emma looked up, her eyes, so like Jonathan's in shape and color, meeting her mother's. From what? Sarah smiled, realizing Emma had no context for the journey that had preceded her birth. From where I started, before Matthew's innovation, before you. Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life now. Emma set down her tablet. You built all this from nothing. It's kind of incredible when you think about it. We built it, Sarah corrected gently. You're as much a part of this story as I am. As their private jet took off for New York the next morning, Sarah watched the Chicago skyline recede beneath them. She had no way of knowing that destiny had orchestrated a reunion that would shake the foundations of her carefully built new world and reopen wounds she believed had long since healed. The private jet began its descent into New York airspace, the Manhattan skyline materializing through wisps of cloud. Sarah gazed out the window, a slight smile playing on her lips as she remembered her first visit to the city. A wide-eyed tourist from Indiana who had marveled at the towering buildings and endless possibilities. Now she returned as one of the most powerful businesswomen in America, her company's logo emblazoned on the very jet carrying her through these skies. "We'll be landing in 15 minutes, Ms. Matthews," the pilot announced over the intercom. "Weather in New York is clear, 68 degrees. Emma looked up from her tablet where she'd been fine-tuning algorithms during the entire flight. "I suppose I should change soon," she said, eyeing the garment bag hanging near the cabin door. "Probably a good idea," Sarah agreed, already mentally transitioning into the poised, public version of herself that galas like this required. 2 hours later, their limousine pulled up to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, its grand facade illuminated for the Clinton Foundation Gala. Photographers lined the entrance, flashbulbs creating a storm of light as celebrities, politicians, and business luminaries made their way up the iconic steps. When Sarah emerged from the car, a ripple of recognition passed through the press line. The golden dress she'd selected was understated yet unmistakably elegant, projecting exactly the image she intended. Successful without being ostentatious, confident without arrogance. Behind her, Emma stepped out in her champagne-colored gown, looking older than her 15 years and remarkably poised. "Ms. Matthews, Sarah, over here!" called the photographers, their cameras clicking rapidly. Sarah navigated the press line with practiced ease, positioning Emma beside her for several photos before moving toward the entrance, where an event coordinator waited to escort them inside. "Ms. Matthews, we're so honored you could join us tonight," the young woman gushed, leading them through the grand entrance hall. "The Foundation is particularly excited to recognize your community energy initiative. The award presentation will be after dinner, around 9:30. Inside, the museum's vast hall had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting prismatic light over elaborately decorated tables. The elite of American society mingled beneath priceless artworks, glasses of champagne in hand, the gentle hum of string quartet music underlying the buzz of conversation. "Sarah Matthews," a booming voice cut through the ambient noise. Senator Wilkins, a silver-haired man with a perpetual campaign smile, approached with arms outstretched. "The revolutionary of sustainable energy. I read about your expansion into the international market. Impressive stuff." "Thank you, Senator," Sarah replied, accepting his handshake. "We're particularly excited about our Singapore project. The potential impact on developing economies is substantial." "And who is this brilliant young lady?" he asked, turning to Emma. "My daughter, Emma," Sarah said proudly. "She's currently at MIT, developing optimization algorithms for our next-generation systems." The senator's eyebrows rose. "MIT? At your age? Extraordinary." As the evening progressed, Sarah moved through the crowd with diplomatic precision, navigating conversations with CEOs, celebrities, and political figures. Emma remained by her side, impressing everyone she met with her articulate explanations of complex energy concepts, occasionally causing her mother to marvel at the confident young woman her daughter had become. It was during a conversation with the CEO of Goldman Sachs about sustainable investment strategies that Sarah's world tilted on its axis. From across the crowded room, through a momentary parting of the crowd, she caught sight of a face that, despite the passage of 15 years, she would recognize anywhere. Jonathan Reeves stood near a column, champagne flute in hand, deep in conversation with an investor Sarah recognized from financial news programs. The recognition hit her like a physical blow, causing her to miss the banker's question entirely. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. As the banker continued, Sarah's eyes returned involuntarily to Jonathan. Age had altered him. His once dark hair now showed significant gray at the temples, and lines had formed around his eyes and mouth. He looked thinner than she remembered, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. Beside him stood a woman perhaps 15 years his junior, blonde and beautiful in the conventional way of second wives, her diamond jewelry catching the light with every gesture. Emma noticed her mother's sudden tension. "Mom, is everything okay?" Sarah took a deliberate breath, centering herself. "Yes, sweetie, I just recognized someone from a long time ago." "Someone important?" Emma asked, curious. "Someone from the past," Sarah replied carefully. "It's nothing to worry about." Throughout dinner, Sarah found herself acutely aware of Jonathan's presence in the room, though they were seated at opposite ends of the vast space. She could feel the weight of his occasional glances, sense the moment when he must have realized who she was. The surrealism of the situation struck her, sitting here among the elite, being honored for her achievements, while the man who had once declared her fundamentally insufficient watched from afar. When the program began, Sarah forced herself to focus on the various speakers and presentations. The Foundation's work was important, and she genuinely supported their initiatives, but part of her remained vigilant, aware of Jonathan's presence like a splinter beneath her skin. "And now," announced the evening's host, "we're honored to recognize Sarah Matthews, founder and CEO of Matthews Innovation, whose revolutionary community energy program has removed 15,000 families from energy poverty. From a single mother fighting against all odds to one of America's most influential women, her story personifies the American dream." The crowd applauded as Sarah made her way to the stage, the spotlight following her path. As she accepted the Crystal Award, she caught sight of Jonathan again. His face had paled at the mention of single mother, his knuckles white around his champagne glass. Beside him, his wife leaned over to whisper something, her expression curious. Sarah's acceptance speech was brief but powerful, focusing on the communities her technology had helped rather than her personal journey. As she returned to her seat, the weight of eyes followed her, including, she knew, Jonathan's. After the formal program concluded, guests moved to the museum's terrace for the reception. The Manhattan skyline provided a dramatic backdrop, the night sky clear and dotted with stars barely visible against the city's glow. Sarah was engaged in conversation with a group of potential investors when she felt a presence at her elbow. The investors, sensing the sudden tension, discreetly excused themselves, leaving Sarah face to face with the ghost of her past. "Sarah, it's been a long time." Jonathan's voice was exactly as she remembered it, though perhaps lacking some of its former confidence. Up close, the years showed more clearly on his face, the subtle sag beneath his jawline, the faint network of lines around his eyes that expensive creams had failed to erase. "Jonathan Reeves," Sarah said, her voice coolly composed. "The man who said I would never be anything more than a waitress from Indiana." He attempted a smile, but it faltered under her steady gaze. "You look well. Very well, actually." $8 billion tend to do that to a person," she replied with a slight smile. "How is the real estate market? I heard your company faced difficulties recently." The barb struck its target. Jonathan's expression tightened momentarily. "Just an adjustment period. The luxury sector is recalibrating." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of unspoken history. "So," he finally said, his eyes darting briefly toward Emma, who stood chatting with a renowned physicist across the terrace. "That young woman is Emma, my daughter." Sarah's emphasis on the possessive was subtle but unmistakable. "Our daughter, biologically speaking." Jonathan swallowed visibly, his composure slipping. Before he could respond, Emma approached, tablet in hand, completely unaware of the man's identity. "Mom, Dr. Hirsch wants to discuss implementing my algorithm in the Phoenix projects," she said, holding up the screen displaying complex equations. "He thinks we can increase efficiency by another 4% with minimal hardware adjustments." Jonathan froze, staring at the girl who was undeniably his daughter. The resemblance was striking. Emma had his eyes, his nose, the same defined jawline. But there was something else about her, a confidence and sharp intelligence that radiated from every gesture. "Emma, this is Jonathan Reeves," Sarah introduced with remarkable composure. "An acquaintance from the past." "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reeves," Emma said politely, extending her hand. "Are you in real estate? I read about Matthews Holdings acquiring Reeves Properties last quarter, one of our subsidiaries, I believe." The innocent comment landed like a precision strike. Jonathan's face paled further as he shook Emma's hand mechanically. "You purchased my companies?" "3 of them, actually," Sarah confirmed with professional detachment. "They were undervalued and fit our diversification strategy. Business is business, Jonathan." Other guests began to drift toward their conversation, attracted by Sarah's presence and the palpable tension emanating from the interaction. "Is it true that Matthews Innovation is developing the system that will revolutionize the East Coast power grid?" asked a senator, unknowingly interrupting the charged moment. "Yes, Senator. Emma here is the mind behind the core algorithm," Sarah responded with evident pride. Admiring gazes turned toward the teenager, while Jonathan remained rooted in place, a ghost from the past that no one else recognized or acknowledged. "If you'll excuse us," Sarah said finally, "we have an early flight to Boston tomorrow. Harvard Business School has invited Emma to speak about technological innovation to the next generation of leaders." As she guided Emma away, Sarah turned back one final time, meeting Jonathan's stunned gaze. "What saddens me most, Jonathan, isn't that you lost the chance to know our brilliant daughter, but that you've spent 15 years believing your value came from diminishing others, while I discovered mine came from lifting up those society deemed insignificant." The words hung in the air like a final verdict as murmurs spread through the gathering, and Jonathan remained alone with the crushing realization of the empire he could have shared and the family he had discarded. Sarah's words lingered in the air like smoke as she guided Emma through the crowd, nodding politely to dignitaries who tried to catch her attention. Behind them, Jonathan remained frozen, the weight of her parting statement settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. The following morning, Sarah's phone vibrated incessantly as notifications flooded in. The first came from her PR director, a link to page 6 with the headline, "Tech Billionaire Confronts Ex Who Abandoned Her Pregnant." By noon, variations of the story had spread to business publications and social media, each adding more details gleaned from eager gala attendees who had witnessed the exchange. "Did you see this?" Emma asked over breakfast in their hotel suite, holding up her tablet to display a particularly dramatic headline, "From Waitress to Billionaire, Revenge Served on a Golden Platter." Sarah sighed, stirring her coffee. "I suppose it was inevitable. People love drama." "Are you okay?" Emma studied her mother's face with concern. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, surprised to discover it was true. 15 years is a long time. He can't hurt us anymore." 6,000 miles away in a Manhattan penthouse, Jonathan Reeves was not fine. He stared at the tablet in his wife's manicured hands, the blood draining from his face as he read the details of his past cruelty splashed across the screen. "You abandoned a pregnant woman? Your own child?" Brittany's voice rose with each word, her carefully cultivated socialite composure cracking. "Do you have any idea what this makes you look like? What it makes me look like for being married to you?" "It wasn't like that," Jonathan protested weakly. "The articles are sensationalizing. Did you or did you not leave Sarah Matthews when she was pregnant with your daughter?" Brittany demanded, her blue eyes cold with fury. Jonathan's silence was answer enough. "My God," she whispered, tossing the tablet onto the marble counter where it skidded to a stop against his untouched breakfast. "I married a monster." By the end of the week, 3 members of Jonathan's board of directors had tendered their resignations. Their formal letters cited pursuing other opportunities, but the personal calls that followed were brutally frank. "I have 3 daughters, Jonathan," explained Richard Hargrove, who had served on the board for 12 years. I can't in good conscience continue our association after learning how you treat women and children. It's not personal, it's ethical." It was, of course, entirely personal, and Jonathan knew it. The resignations were just the beginning. Within days, investors began quietly withdrawing support from Reeves Properties' remaining projects. A prestigious philanthropic foundation in New York rescinded their invitation for him to join their board. Former allies suddenly found their schedules too full for lunch meetings. Desperate, Jonathan reached for the one thing he believed could fix any situation: money. He sent a massive bouquet of rare orchids to the Matthews Innovation headquarters in Chicago, along with a handwritten note requesting a private meeting. The flowers were returned the same day, the note unopened. Next, he tried emails, formal at first, then increasingly urgent. Each received the same automated response: "Thank you for your message to Sarah Matthews. Due to high volume, all correspondence is initially reviewed by the Office of the CEO. If your matter pertains to business operations, please contact the appropriate department. Personal correspondence is respectfully declined at this time." Phone calls to Matthews Innovation yielded nothing but polite stonewalling from Jennifer Lopez, Sarah's impenetrable chief of staff. "Ms. Matthews appreciates your attempts at communication, but suggests any matters be addressed through proper corporate channels. If this concerns recent acquisitions, our legal department is available for clarification." After 2 weeks of futile attempts, Jonathan boarded his private jet to Chicago, determined to force a meeting. The receptionist in the soaring lobby of Matthews Tower greeted him with practiced professionalism. "I need to see Sarah Matthews," he demanded, forgetting the charm that had once been his most reliable tool. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" Her smile never wavered. "No, but she'll want to see me. Tell her Jonathan Reeves is here." 20 minutes later, after numerous calls and visible consultation with security, the receptionist delivered the verdict. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves, but Ms. Matthews is currently on a 2-week business trip to Asia, expanding operations in Singapore and Tokyo. Her office suggests scheduling through proper channels upon her return." Jonathan returned to New York defeated, only to find Brittany packing her designer luggage. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice hollow. "To my mother's in Boston," she replied without looking at him. "I've already spoken with my attorney. Expect paperwork next week." It took Jonathan another month and the hiring of an exorbitantly expensive crisis management firm to secure a meeting at Matthews Innovation. When the appointment was finally confirmed, he spent hours selecting his suit, rehearsing what he would say, how he would explain himself. But when he arrived at the designated conference room on the 53rd floor, Sarah was nowhere to be seen. Instead, 3 corporate attorneys sat at the gleaming table, expressions professionally neutral. "Where is Sarah?" Jonathan demanded, remaining standing as the door closed behind him. "Ms. Matthews is extremely busy, Mr. Reeves," explained the lead attorney, a woman in her 50s with penetrating eyes. "She runs a global company and has a daughter to raise. She's delegated this meeting to our team." The meeting lasted exactly 22 minutes. The attorneys clarified the terms of the Reeves Properties acquisitions, confirmed that all transactions had been legally sound, and politely but firmly declined Jonathan's request for a personal meeting with either Sarah or Emma. "Ms. Matthews has instructed us to inform you that while she harbors no ill will, she sees no benefit in rehashing painful history," the lead attorney concluded, closing her portfolio with finality. Meanwhile, Emma had discovered the full truth about her father through the media coverage. She approached her mother one evening as they shared dinner in their penthouse, her expression thoughtful. "He really said all those things to you?" she asked quietly. "That you'd always be just a waitress from Indiana? That I would make you more useless than you already were?" Sarah set down her fork, considering her answer carefully. "Yes," she said simply. "He believed I wasn't enough for the world he belonged to." Emma was silent for a moment, absorbing this. "Well, technically now we belong to a world he doesn't have access to," she observed with a logic beyond her years. "Is that what they call poetic justice?" A smile touched Sarah's lips. Justice isn't about having more money or power than him, sweetheart. It's in the fact that we built a complete and meaningful life without needing him at all. 3 weeks after the initial encounter, Jonathan managed to intercept Emma as she exited a lecture she had delivered at the Chicago Technology Center. He stepped forward as she descended the stairs, surrounded by admiring professors and students. "Emma, please," he called, his designer suit now hanging slightly loose on his frame. "Just give me a chance to know you. I'm your father." The crowd parted, murmurs rippling as recognition spread. Emma stopped, studying him with the same analytical gaze she applied to complex equations. "Biologically, yes," she replied, her voice steady. "But being a father is much more than providing DNA, Mr. Reeves." "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted, desperation evident in his voice. "But people change. I've changed." Emma tilted her head slightly. "Interesting. I analyzed reports about you over the past 15 years. I found no evidence of significant change until 3 weeks ago when you discovered my mother is now one of the most powerful women in the country." She checked her watch with deliberate precision. "I have a video conference with MIT researchers in 12 minutes. Good day." The calculated coldness of her dismissal, so similar to what he had once inflicted on Sarah, cut deeper than any explicit insult could have. In a final, desperate move, Jonathan drafted a formal proposal to Sarah. He wanted to establish a trust fund of $100 million for Emma, virtually his entire remaining fortune. The response came as a personal letter, the first direct communication from Sarah. "Jonathan, Emma and I appreciate your offer but must decline. She already holds stock in Matthews Innovation valued at approximately $1.2 billion, in addition to her own patents and investments. More importantly than any financial value, Emma possesses something money cannot buy. She grew up knowing she is unconditionally loved and valued exactly as she is. I don't seek revenge, Jonathan. In fact, I'm grateful for the lesson you taught me 15 years ago. You showed me exactly the kind of person I didn't want to be, and the kind of world I didn't want for my daughter. I wish you peace and genuine personal growth. Sarah Matthews." The letter, in its serene tone devoid of bitterness, represented the final blow. There was no anger to fuel his hopes, no hatred to justify his pursuit. There was only the quiet indifference of someone who had moved on long ago. In his increasingly empty office, Jonathan stared out at the Manhattan skyline while listening to a radio interview with Sarah about Matthews Innovation's new research center, a $3 billion investment creating 10,000 jobs in economically depressed communities. "True innovation isn't just about technology," Sarah's confident voice came through the speaker. "It's about creating systems that allow people to fulfill their highest potential. 15 years ago, someone told me I would never be enough. That became my greatest motivation to prove that we are all more than enough when given the chance to flourish." Jonathan switched off the radio and stared at his reflection in the window. The man who had dismissed Sarah as insufficient now faced the irrefutable truth. The truly insufficient one had always been himself, not in financial resources or social status, but in the ability to recognize true value in others and in himself. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away, Sarah and Emma soared over the Grand Canyon in a private helicopter, pointing out locations for their next revolutionary solar energy project. Their faces, illuminated by the setting sun, reflected not just business success, but the more important victory: the freedom to live without the weight of approval from those who never valued them for who they truly were. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.